July 2019, Atlanta, Georgia. A bright orange Corvette gets pulled over for a routine traffic violation. The driver? Dominique Jones, better known as Lil Baby, one of the hottest rappers in the world. In the car, officers find a loaded firearm. Baby gets arrested, charged with possession. The irony is thick enough to cut with a knife. Just 3 years earlier, this same man was serving 2 years in prison. 2 years before that, he was making more money in the streets than most people make in a year at their 9 to 5. And a decade before that arrest in the Corvette, he was a 12-year-old kid in Oakland City, Atlanta, getting arrested for the first time. Attempted burglary. But here's what makes this story different from every other rapper was a drug dealer narrative you've heard. Lil Baby wasn't just some corner boy trying to get by. He was running an operation so successful that he was serving the same rappers who would later become his collaborators. He was living like a star before he ever touched a microphone. He had 2 condos at 17 years old. He was making 6 figures while most teenagers were worried about prom. This is the story of how $60 became $100,000, how prison became the catalyst for a $50 million empire, how a kid who sold crack in the 5th grade became one of the most streamed artists in the world. This is the story of Dominique Jones, the street entrepreneur who became Lil Baby. And to understand how he made it out, you first have to understand how deep he was in. December 3rd, 1994. West End, Atlanta. A baby boy is born to a single mother who served in the Marines and now works for the Postal Service. His name, Dominique Armani Jones. His father will leave when he's 2 years old. His mother will raise him alone in one of Atlanta's most challenging neighborhoods. Oakland City in the mid-90s and early 2000s wasn't the gentrified, revitalized Atlanta that exists today. This was a neighborhood where burnt-out houses sat next to occupied homes, where poverty and violence were daily realities, where emerald trees lined streets that had seen too much pain. But for a kid growing up there, this was just normal. This was home. Young Dominique, who his mother called Baby, was smart. Not just street smart, though he'd develop that later. Actually, academically intelligent, quick learner, sharp mind. But the environment around him was teaching lessons that no school curriculum could compete with. By the time he was 10 years old, Dominique Jones had already learned the most important economic lesson of his young life. Money changes everything. He saw it every day. The kids with nice shoes, the ones who could afford lunch, the ones who didn't have to stress about whether the lights would be on when they got home, they all had one thing in common: access to money. And in Oakland City, there was one primary economy that provided that access. Specifically, what the older guys in the neighborhood called the 3400 system. Here's how it worked. Older hustlers, guys in their 20s and 30s who were too well known to police to keep moving product themselves, would recruit younger kids, 10, 11, 12 years old. They'd give these kids crack rocks to sell. The kids were perfect. They looked innocent. They could move through the neighborhood without attracting attention, and if they got caught, they'd go to juvenile detention instead of adult prison. It was exploitation. It was child labor in the drug trade. It was morally indefensible. And for a 10-year-old kid who watched his mother work 2 jobs and still struggle to make ends meet, it was an opportunity. In his own words, from interviews years later, "I sold my first crack rock when I was in the 5th grade." Think about what that means. 5th grade. Most kids that age are worried about video games and cartoons. Dominique Jones was learning the economics of the street drug trade. Supply and demand, customer service, territory management, risk assessment. These weren't lessons from a business school textbook. This was MBA level education happening in real time on the corners of Oakland City. And Baby was a quick study. The first time he made real money, not just a few dollars here and there, but actual stacks, something clicked. He saw the power that money had, the respect it commanded, the problems it could solve, the stress it could eliminate from his mother's face. He was hooked, not on the drugs he was selling, but on the business itself. By the time Dominique reached high school, Booker T. Washington High School in Northwest Atlanta, the path forward seemed clear to him. School was teaching him algebra and history. The streets were teaching him how to make more money in a week than his teachers made in a month. The choice, from his perspective, wasn't really a choice at all. He dropped out in 9th grade, 14, maybe 15 years old. His mother was devastated. She'd served in the Marines, worked legitimate jobs her whole life, tried to instill those same values in her son. And now he was walking away from education, from the legal path to success, to fully commit to the streets. But here's what she didn't fully understand at the time, and what most people still don't understand about why kids make this choice. Baby wasn't lazy. He wasn't looking for an easy path. If anything, he was choosing the harder, more dangerous route because it was the only one that seemed to offer real economic opportunity on the timeline he needed. By 16 years old, Dominique Jones was making what he called real money. Not drug dealer money in the movies, but actual substantial income. Enough to rent apartments, enough to buy cars, enough to live independently while most kids his age were asking their parents for gas money. This is where the nickname that would eventually become his rap persona was born. There was a man in the neighborhood named Wicked, an OG, someone who commanded respect. He started calling young Dominique Lil Baby because of his youth and his small stature compared to the older hustlers. The name stuck, Baby. Eventually, Lil Baby. The irony being that there was nothing small about his ambitions or his operation. By 17 years old, still not old enough to vote, not old enough to buy alcohol legally, Baby had 2 condominiums, not living in his mother's house or bouncing between friends' couches. 2 condos, each costing $2,000 a month in rent. That's $4,000 a month just in housing costs, which means his income had to be substantially higher to support that lifestyle. Do the math. If he's spending $4,000 monthly on rent alone, he's likely clearing $10,000 to $15,000 a month minimum. That's $120,000 to $180,000 annually. As a teenager, in cash, tax-free. This wasn't small-time corner dealing anymore. This was a business. This was an operation that required capital, inventory management, customer relationships, and risk mitigation strategies that would make legitimate business owners impressed if they could get past the illegal nature of the product. Baby's motivation was crystal clear, and he's spoken about it openly in interviews. He watched his mother struggle. He watched her work constantly and still barely make ends meet. He saw other kids with things he wanted, things she couldn't afford to give him, and he decided he wouldn't watch anymore. He'd do something about it. Was it the right choice? Legally and morally, no. But from his perspective as a teenager in Oakland City, it made perfect sense. Now here's where Baby's story intersects with the Atlanta music industry in a way that nobody expected, least of all Baby himself. Quality Control Music, QC, the label founded by Coach K and P, the same label that would break Migos, Rich the Kid, and eventually reshape Atlanta's sound into the dominant force in hip-hop. In the early 2000s, before QC was the powerhouse it would become, the studio was in a neighborhood Baby was very familiar with. And while Migos was starting to blow up, while Rich the Kid was building his buzz, while Skippa Dippa and other artists were cutting their teeth, there was a young hustler who was always around the studio, Lil Baby, but not as an artist, as the weed man. This detail is crucial to understanding Baby's transformation because it shows how close he was to the music industry without being part of it. He wasn't trying to rap. He wasn't writing verses in the back of the studio. He wasn't asking P or Coach K for a deal. He was there to serve a clientele that had money to spend and a consistent need for his product. Think about the economics of this. Rappers, especially ones starting to get buzz, are making money from shows. In those early days, Migos might make $30,000 for a show. They'd come back to Atlanta with $50,000 or $60,000 in cash. And Baby, with his prestigious reputation as a reliable plug, would be there waiting. In his own words from interviews, they probably get like 30 grand a show. They come back with 50, 60, and I might win the whole 50. He wasn't just selling them weed, he was gambling with them, socializing with them, building relationships with guys who were on their way to becoming superstars. He was watching the music business from the inside, seeing how much money could be made, understanding the mechanics of the industry, even if he didn't realize at the time that he was getting an education that would prove invaluable. Some of these relationships went even deeper. Young Thug had gone to Booker T. Washington High School, the same school Baby dropped out of. Thug was a few years ahead of him, but they knew of each other, moved in similar circles. Offset from Migos, Baby shared a condo with him at one point. They were roommates. Offset was grinding, trying to make Migos work, and Baby was grinding, building his street empire. 2 young men from Atlanta, both hustling, both trying to make it out by any means necessary. The irony is profound. Baby was supplying the same people who would later become his peers in the music industry. He was the plug for artists who were just starting to make real money. He had relationships with future superstars before they were stars. But at this point in his life, music was their path, not his. He was committed to the streets. He was making more money than most of these rappers. Why would he switch lanes? That question would get answered, but not in a way anyone expected. Let's talk specifically about Baby's business model because understanding how he made money in the streets explains explains a lot about his later success in music. The $60,000 to $100,000 formula that people reference in Baby's story isn't literal. It's representative of how street economics work when you understand them at a sophisticated level. Here's what that means. If you buy a brick of coke, you can cut it, cook it into crack, and turn it into $100,000 in revenue if you move it properly through a network of dealers. That $60 isn't the price of a single rock. It's the price per unit multiplied across volume that creates the profit margin. Baby understood this at a level most street dealers never reach. Most corner dealers are just trying to make enough to survive, to pay rent, to buy clothes and jewelry and cars that make them feel successful. They're thinking transaction by transaction. And Baby was thinking systemically. He wasn't just hustling, he was building an operation. He had multiple people working for him. He had different territories across Atlanta's various zones. He had inventory management, supply chain logistics, customer relationships, and competitive advantages that made his operation more successful than others. He was living like a rapper before being one. Exotic cars, he had those. Designer clothes, he was draped in them. Jewelry, he was iced out. Respect across the city. He commanded that from east side to west side to south side. In Atlanta's street hierarchy, Baby had status. He wasn't the biggest name. He wasn't running a cartel, but he was known. He was respected. He was making legitimate money in an illegitimate business. And that reputation mattered. In a city as competitive and dangerous as Atlanta's drug trade in the 2010s, reputation was everything. It determined whether you got robbed or respected, whether you got good prices from your suppliers or got taxed, whether you could expand your territory or got pushed out. Baby built a reputation for being reliable, for having quality product, for being someone you could do business with. That's not accidental. That's entrepreneurial instinct applied to street economics. The relationships Baby built during this time are fascinating because they show the intersection of two worlds, the street economy and the music industry, that often run parallel in Atlanta, but rarely merge the way they did in his story. Young Thug was already starting to blow up. His weird, melodic style was polarizing but undeniably influential. He was getting cosigns from major artists. He was building a following that would eventually make him one of the most important artists of his generation. And Baby was his weed man. Migos was on their way from Versace buzz to Bad and Bougie superstardom. They were performing at clubs across the South, building their fan base, perfecting their sound. And Baby was in the studio, serving them. The genius of Baby's position, though he didn't recognize it as genius at the time, was that he was embedded in the culture. He wasn't some outsider trying to break into music. He was already there, already trusted, already part of the ecosystem that was creating some of the most important music of the 2010s. He was watching these guys transform from local artists grinding for small show money into superstars making millions. He was seeing the timeline of success, understanding how long it took, recognizing the work required. And crucially, he was seeing that music money wasn't that different from street money in some fundamental ways. Both required hustle. Both required building a network. Both required consistency and reputation. Both required taking risks and dealing with competition. The product was different. The legal implications were vastly different, but the underlying business principles remarkably similar. Chapter 6, Coach K's Vision. Pierre P. Thomas and Kevin Coach K. Lee are two of the most important executives in modern hip-hop. They built quality control from nothing into a label that dominated the 2010s and 2020s. They signed Migos when nobody else believed. They developed a roster that defined Atlanta's sound. And Coach K saw something in Lil Baby that Baby didn't see in himself. It started with a conversation outside the QC studio. Baby was there doing what he always did, serving his clientele, making money, living his life. Coach K approached him with a proposition that seemed absurd at the time. "Baby man, why don't you rap? You got the swag, the lingo, the respect." Baby's response was immediate and definitive. "Coach, I'm a street nigga." Which was true. That was his identity. That was who he'd been since he was 10 years old. The idea of being a rapper seemed like a fantasy, a pipe dream for people who didn't have a real way to make money. But Coach K persisted. He'd been in the music industry for decades. He'd helped break Young Jeezy, who literally created the blueprint for trap music. He'd managed Gucci Mane through the peak of his influence. He'd turned Migos from local Atlanta artists into global superstars. He knew talent when he saw it. And what he saw in Baby wasn't just potential. It was something more specific and more valuable: authenticity. "Half these rappers telling your story," Coach K told him. "Your shit's so real." This is the key insight that Coach K had. In an era where authenticity is currency in hip-hop, Baby wasn't trying to be authentic. He simply was. He wasn't making up stories for song. He was living the life that other rappers were rapping about. He had the credibility, the experiences, the real-life narrative that audiences were craving. Baby kept saying no. He'd been saying no for months, maybe even a year or more. Every time Coach K would bring it up, Baby would brush it off. He was making too much money in the streets. He had too much to lose. Rap seemed like a gamble when he already had a sure thing. But Coach K is nothing if not persistent. He'd built his entire career on believing in artists before anyone else did. He wasn't going to give up on Baby just because Baby didn't believe in himself as a rapper yet. The opportunity was there. The vision was there. The infrastructure was there. QC had the resources to develop Baby properly if he decided to take the leap. All that was missing was the catalyst that would force Baby to make the decision. That catalyst was coming, but it would come in the form of handcuffs and a prison cell. When you're making the kind of money Baby was making in the streets, when you're moving the way he was moving, when you're as visible as he was becoming, the law catches up eventually. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Between the ages of 16 and 17, Baby got arrested multiple times. The specific details are sealed because they happened while he was a juvenile, but the pattern was clear. He was pushing his luck. He was successful enough to be on law enforcement's radar, but young enough to think he was invincible. At 18, the juvenile system's protections disappeared. Now he was being charged as an adult, and adult consequences in the criminal justice system are no joke. He caught a probation violation. The details matter less than the result. He was offered a program deal. Complete the program, stay clean, and he'd serve 6 months. It seemed manageable. He agreed, but here's the thing about the criminal justice system. It doesn't always work the way you're told it will. The program didn't take 6 months. It took a year. Baby was stuck in a situation where he'd made a deal based on one timeline and was living a completely different reality. The frustration was building. The anger was mounting. He felt trapped, betrayed by a system that had lied to him about the terms of his sentence. And then came the incident that would change everything, a racial altercation. The specifics aren't entirely public, but the result was Baby was sentenced to 2 years in prison. Not jail, not a program. Prison, real prison, where people serve hard time for serious crimes. At 19 years old, Dominique Jones, who'd been making 6 figures in the streets, who'd been living in 2 condos, who'd been serving some of the biggest names in Atlanta hip-hop, was now wearing a prison uniform and facing 2 years behind bars. In his own words from later interviews, "You're going to have to be there to actually just fathom what it was like. It's misery. Prison changes you." That's not a cliche. It's a fundamental truth about the experience of incarceration. The question is how it changes you. Does it make you harder or smarter? Does it confirm your path or force you to question it? Does it break you or rebuild you? For Baby, prison became a classroom of a different kind. He had cousins inside serving life sentences. Not one cousin, multiple cousins. Family members who would never see the outside world again, who would grow old and die behind bars, who had made mistakes or been in the wrong place at the wrong time, or gotten caught up in the violence that defines so much of street life. He personally knew 20 people serving life sentences. 20. That's not a statistic. That's a network of human beings who would never experience freedom again. 5 of those people were close friends, people he'd grown up with, hustled with, lived life with. Now he was visiting them in prison, seeing their reality, understanding what the end game of street life actually looked like. This is where Baby's perspective started to shift. When you're in the streets making money, you can intellectually understand that prison or death are the most likely outcomes. But understanding something intellectually is different from seeing it up close, from living in that reality every day. Baby started thinking about life sentences versus the death penalty. In his view, life sentences were worse. At least with the death penalty, there's an end. With life, you just exist. No future, no hope, no possibility of change. Just decades of the same walls, the same routine, the same slowly dying inside, while the world moves on without you. That realization was horrifying. Every week, his mother would visit. She'd drive to whatever facility he was in, go through the security process, sit across from her son in a prison visiting room, and try to maintain hope that he'd make it out and make something of himself. One visit changed everything. Baby looked at his mother, this woman who'd served her country, worked multiple jobs, sacrificed everything to try to give him a better life, and said something she never expected to hear. "Mom, I want to be a rapper." Her response was disbelief, not because she didn't believe in him, but because where was this coming from? Her son had never shown interest in music. He'd been committed to the streets. He dropped out of school to hustle. hustle, and now, sitting in prison, he was suddenly talking about becoming a rapper. It seemed like a prison fantasy. Every guy locked up talks about what they're going to do when they get out: start a business, write a book, become a rapper. Most of them never follow through. The streets pull them back, or the reality of building a legitimate career seems too hard compared to returning to what they know. But Baby was serious. More serious than he'd ever been about anything except hustling. Coach K's words kept echoing in his head. Why don't you rap? You got the swag, the lingo, the respect. He'd been saying no for so long because he didn't need to rap. He had money, he had status, he had everything he wanted. But now, sitting in prison, watching his cousins serve life sentences, seeing 5 close friends who would never leave, he understood something crucial. The streets only end 2 ways: prison or death. There is no retirement plan. There is no getting out ahead. You either get out completely or you die in the game. Music was his exit strategy. When Baby got out on work release and started going to the studio, he faced a problem that seems almost comical in retrospect. He didn't actually know how to rap. He'd been around rappers for years. He'd watched Migos record. He'd been in the studio with Young Thug. He'd seen the process. But watching and doing are completely different things. This is where Young Thug and Gunna, both QC artists, both guys Baby had relationships with from the streets, became his teachers. Think about how wild that is. Young Thug, one of the most influential artists of his generation, taking time to teach his former weed man how to rap. Gunna, who was building his own career, showing Baby the basics of writing and recording. But here's what they discovered almost immediately. Baby was a natural. He didn't have the weird melodic style of Young Thug. He didn't have Gunna's smooth flow. But what he had was something arguably more valuable: authenticity and the ability to translate his real-life experiences into compelling music. Music journalists would later describe him as a dexterous rhymer with strong grasp of melody. But that technical description misses what made Baby special from the start. He rapped like he talked. He didn't put on a persona. He didn't try to sound like anyone else. He was himself, just over Atlanta trap beats. The Atlanta trap sound he stepped into was perfectly suited for his style. Booming 808 drums that hit like earthquakes. Hi-hats that rattled at triplet speed. Auto-tune smeared over vocals just enough to smooth rough edges while maintaining the rawness of the delivery. This was the sound that Migos had perfected, that Young Thug had weirdified, that Gucci and Jeezy had pioneered. And Baby fit right into it while somehow still sounding distinct. He also had something that would prove crucial to his success: work ethic. The same drive that made him successful in the streets, he applied to music. He started working at what industry insiders later called a frighteningly productive pace. When you've been in the streets, when you've hustled every day just to survive, the work required in a recording studio seems easy by comparison. No risk of getting arrested, no risk of getting killed, just long hours and creative focus. Baby was built for that grind. July 1st, 2016. After 2 years in prison, 2 years of reflecting on his life, watching cousins serve life sentences, recognizing that the streets were a dead end, Dominique Jones walked out of prison a free man. Most people getting out after a bid that long want to see family, eat real food, sleep in a real bed. Baby did all that. But then he did something that showed how serious he was about this music thing. He went straight to the studio. Not a week later, not a few days later. Straight from freedom to the booth. This is where reality hit him like a truck. His first recording session was a disaster. He'd been practicing in his head for 2 years, imagining what his first song would sound like, building up this moment in his mind. And when he actually got in the booth and tried to record, it didn't work. The timing was off. The delivery was awkward. The confidence he had in his head didn't translate through the microphone. He sounded like what he was, a first-time rapper with no experience trying to figure out how to do something he'd only watched other people do. He left the studio frustrated and temporarily abandoned the idea of music. But here's the thing about Baby. When he commits to something, he commits. The streets taught him that half-stepping gets you nowhere. You're either all in or all out. By January 2017, 6 months after that failed first session, he was ready to try again. Not because he suddenly felt inspired or because someone pushed him, but because he'd made a decision, and decisions only matter when you follow through. He went back to the studio. He committed to finishing a song, not just starting one and giving up when it got hard. Actually finishing it. The result was Days Off, and by any objective standard, Days Off was rough. The production was okay, the lyrics were basic, the delivery was unpolished, but it was finished. It was real. it existed. That completion, that follow-through, was more important than the quality. Because finishing that first song proved to himself that he could do this. He could actually be a rapper if he put in the work. This is where P's strategy came into play. Pierre Thomas understood something fundamental about building a rap career in the streaming era. Volume matters. Consistency matters. You can't drop one song and expect to blow up. You need to saturate the market with music, give fans content to connect with, build momentum through sheer productivity. P told Baby, we're going to flood the market, you're going to release constantly, we're going to build your fan base through work ethic. And that's exactly what they did. In 2017, Baby released 4 projects. 4, that's a mixtape every 3 months. Perfect timing with Migos' Lil Baby persona beginning to take shape. Harder Than Hard showing growth. 2, The Hard Way, and Too Hard continuing the momentum. Most artists struggle to release one quality project a year. Baby was dropping 4 in 12 months while also touring, building his live show, and improving his craft in real time. In 2018, he released 3 more projects, including Harder Than Ever, which would be his debut studio album and his mainstream breakthrough. But before the big venues and the hit records, Baby was grinding through what he calls the Chitlin circuit. Small clubs, hole-in-the-wall venues, shows that paid $500 to $1,000. Places where half the crowd hadn't heard of him yet. Rashad, one of Baby's team members, later remembered shows in Jackson, Mississippi. Tiny clubs where Baby would perform for whoever showed up, treating every show like it was Madison Square Garden because he understood that every performance was building his reputation. This is so different from how most artists approach the come-up. A lot of rappers want to skip the small venues, the low-paying shows, the grind of building a fan base one city at a time. They want to go straight from SoundCloud to arena tours. Baby understood from his years in the streets that you build from the bottom up. You establish your foundation before you build the house. You serve your base customers before you expand your territory. The Perfect Timing mixtape is where you can hear Baby starting to find his voice. The project featured Young Thug and Lil Yachty, established artists lending credibility to the new guy. But more importantly, it featured songs where Baby was starting to sound comfortable, where his street experiences were translating into compelling narratives. Harder Than Hard showed continued growth, but it was a song with a feature from Marlo, another Atlanta artist, that started to get traction in the city. Atlanta was paying attention to this new voice, this guy who seemed to come out of nowhere but somehow sounded like he'd been rapping forever. And then came the breakthrough, My Dog and Freestyle. These weren't just songs, they were moments. They went viral in a way that no one at QC had expected. Not huge mainstream viral, but street viral. Real Atlanta viral. The kind of buzz that means people are actually listening, actually caring, actually connecting with the music. My Dog in particular showcased what made Baby special. The song wasn't flashy, it wasn't trying to be a club banger, it was just Baby rapping about his life, his friends, his experiences in a way that felt completely genuine. The authenticity that Coach K had seen years earlier was coming through in the music. Quality Control's newest star was emerging, not because they'd manufactured him or because they'd created a persona, but because they'd given an authentic voice the platform and resources to be heard. By late 2017 and early 2018, Baby had gone from guy who just got out of prison to one of the most promising new artists in Atlanta. That transformation took less than 18 months. In the music industry, that's lightning speed. May 18th, 2018, Harder Than Ever dropped. This wasn't a mixtape. This wasn't a SoundCloud project. This was Baby's official studio debut, released through Quality Control, Motown Records, and Capitol Records. Major label infrastructure behind it. The album debuted at number 3 on the Billboard 200. Number 3. For a debut album from an artist who'd started rapping less than 2 years earlier, who'd been in prison less than 2 years before that, who'd never intended to be a rapper at all. This was extraordinary. But one song on that album changed everything. Yes, Indeed, featuring Drake. Getting a Drake feature is like getting the golden ticket in modern hip-hop. Drake is the biggest artist in the world. A Drake feature can turn a regional artist into a global star overnight. When Drake jumps on your song, you've been co-signed by the king. Yes Indeed went 3 times platinum. It peaked at number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100. It had hundreds of millions of streams. It was played at clubs, at parties, on the radio, everywhere. Drake's verse was solid, but the star of the song was Baby. His chorus was catchy. His verses had that authentic street feel that made him special. This wasn't Baby trying to make a pop song. This was Baby being himself and the mainstream responding to that authenticity. The success of Yes Indeed put Baby in a different tier. He wasn't an emerging artist anymore. He was a star. He was getting booked for major festivals. He was doing interviews with major media outlets. He was being discussed as one of the leaders of Atlanta's next generation of talent. October 2018, just 5 months after Harder Than Ever, Baby released Drip Harder, a joint mixtape with Gunna, another QC artist who Baby had become close with. The timing was perfect. Both artists were hot. Both were developing rabid fan bases. Both represented this new wave of melodic trap that was dominating streaming platforms. Drip Harder was a commercial smash. It debuted at number 4 on the Billboard 200. But more importantly, it produced Drip Too Hard, a single that would peak at number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 and become one of the defining songs of 2018 to 2019. Drip Too Hard was everywhere. It was the perfect combination of Baby's street credibility and Gunna's melodic smoothness. The song was about flexing, about success, about having made it out of difficult circumstances, and both artists delivered it with such natural charisma that it became inescapable. The song's success on streaming platforms was particularly notable. This was the era when streaming was fully taking over the music industry. Radio still mattered, but streaming numbers were becoming the primary metric of success, and Drip Too Hard dominated streaming charts for months. Baby was becoming known as a streaming monster. His songs accumulated hundreds of millions of plays. His albums moved massive units through streaming equivalents. He was figuring out how to make music that resonated in the algorithmic age while maintaining the authenticity that made him special. February 28, 2020, My Turn dropped. This was Baby's second studio album and his statement of arrival as one of the biggest artists in hip-hop. The album featured appearances from Lil Wayne, Young Thug, Gunna, 42 Dugg, Future, a who's who of rap royalty. But the star was Baby. My Turn debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200. Not number 2, not number 3, number 1, the top of the mountain. But the numbers that really showed Baby's dominance were the streaming statistics. My Turn became the most streamed album in the United States in 2020, in a year that featured releases from Drake, Future, Lil Uzi Vert, and every other major name in hip-hop. Baby's album streamed more than all of them. Think about what that means. A guy who'd been rapping for less than 4 years, who'd been in prison 4 years before that, who'd never intended to be an artist at all. His album was the biggest in the entire country. The album spawned multiple hit singles. Whoa became a viral sensation on TikTok and reached number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100. Some To Prove showcased Baby's more reflective side. Emotionally Scarred showed vulnerability that many street rappers avoid. But the most significant song on the album, and arguably in Baby's entire catalog, wasn't even on the original release. It came later, in June 2020, after the murder of George Floyd and the nationwide protests that followed. June 12, 2020, Lil Baby released The Bigger Picture, a protest song addressing police brutality, systemic racism, and the need for social change. This was risky. Protest songs in hip-hop have a mixed track record. Artists can come off as preachy or inauthentic. Fans who just want club music don't always respond well to overtly political content. And Baby's brand was street authenticity, not political commentary. But The Bigger Picture worked because Baby spoke from experience. He'd been arrested multiple times as a teenager. He'd been incarcerated. He'd seen cousins get life sentences. He'd lived the reality of over-policing and mass incarceration in Black communities. The song wasn't theoretical, it was personal. The Bigger Picture debuted at number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100, Baby's highest charting song as a lead artist at that point. But more importantly, it showed that Baby had evolved beyond just being a street rapper. He was using his platform to address real issues, to advocate for change, to speak for people who didn't have his voice or reach. This was the complete transformation, from street dealer serving rappers to prisoner reflecting on his life, to artist building his career, to superstar using his platform for social impact. The irony of Baby's success is almost too perfect to be real. The same artist he used to serve, the same guys he'd sell weed to, gamble with, watch succeed from the outside, were now his collaborators and peers. Young Thug, who Baby sold to and who later taught him how to rap, featured on multiple Baby songs and vice versa. They went from dealer and customer to artists with mutual respect. Offset from Migos, who Baby shared a condo with during the struggle years, was now a frequent collaborator. They'd gone from roommates trying to figure out life to successful artists trading verses. Gunna, who helped teach Baby the basics of recording, became one of his closest friends and most frequent collaborators. Drip Harder wasn't just a joint project. It was a celebration of two guys who'd both made it out. But the collaborations went beyond his Atlanta circle. Baby was now working with Drake, Lil Wayne, Future, legends in hip-hop. He was going toe-to-toe with the biggest names in music and holding his own. The 2019 arrest in the orange Corvette, the one we opened with, shows this transformation perfectly. Baby got pulled over for a traffic violation, not because he was actively hustling, not because he was doing anything illegal in that moment, but because he was successful and visible and still navigating the reality that success doesn't make you immune to the system. He got charged with possession of a firearm. It was a setback, but nothing like what he'd faced before. And more importantly, he had the resources now to handle it legally, to fight the charges, to have proper representation. The contrast between that arrest and his arrests as a teenager is stark. Same city, same police force, but completely different circumstances. He wasn't a street kid anymore. He was a multi-millionaire artist with lawyers and a team and resources. But Baby's success comes with a weight that people outside his situation can't fully understand. He made it out. He's rich. He's famous. He's accomplished more in 5 years of rapping than most artists accomplish in entire careers. But his friends with life sentences are still in prison. His cousins serving life are still behind bars. The guys he knew who died in the streets are still dead. He got out, but dozens, maybe hundreds of people he knew didn't. That's survivor's guilt at a massive scale. In interviews, Baby talks about not wanting to return to prison with an intensity that goes beyond normal fear of incarceration. For him, prison represents the death of potential. It represents the life he could have had, would have had, if Coach K hadn't persisted, if his mother hadn't supported him, if he hadn't taken that leap from streets to studio. He talks about knowing 5 close friends serving life sentences, 5 people he grew up with, hustled with, lived life with, who will die in prison. Every time he performs at a sold-out arena, every time he sees his streaming numbers reach hundreds of millions, every time he signs another endorsement deal, he's doing it knowing that people just as smart, just as talented, just as human as him are rotting behind bars for making choices similar to the ones he made. The difference? Timing, luck, opportunity, a coach who saw potential and wouldn't let it go. The bigger picture wasn't a one-time thing for Baby. He's continued to use his platform to address systemic issues, to advocate for criminal justice reform, to speak about the realities of growing up in communities like Oakland City. He's donated money to Atlanta schools. He's supported programs that help formerly incarcerated people reintegrate into society. He's spoken publicly about the need for change in how America treats its most vulnerable communities. And this isn't performative activism. This is a guy who lived the reality of over-policing, mass incarceration, and systemic poverty, using his success to try to make things better for people still living in those conditions. Does that absolve the choices he made in the streets? No. Selling crack in the 5th grade, running a drug operation as a teenager, those things had real victims, real harm. Baby has never claimed to be a hero or a role player model for his past actions. But he's also honest about why he made those choices and what needs to change to prevent other kids from making the same decisions. Poverty isn't an excuse, but it is a context. Lack of opportunity isn't an excuse, but it is a reality. Systemic inequality isn't an excuse, but it is a factor. As of 2024, Lil Baby is one of the biggest names in hip-hop. His net worth is estimated at $25 million or more. He's had multiple platinum albums. He's collaborated with every major artist you can name. He's headlined major festivals. He's built a loyal fan base that spans demographics and geography. But the numbers don't tell the whole story. The transformation from Dominique Jones, drug dealer, to Lil Baby, superstar, represents something bigger than personal success. He's proof that people can change, that the worst decisions of your youth don't have to define your entire life. That prison doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the beginning of a new chapter if you have the support and opportunity to write it. He's also proof of something more uncomfortable, that survival in communities like the one he grew up in often requires making choices between bad options. that the kid selling crack in 5th grade is a victim of systemic failures as much as he is a perpetrator of harm, that judging people without understanding their circumstances is easy, but understanding is harder and more important. The irony that hangs over Baby's entire story is this: he made more money in the streets than most people make in years of legitimate work. He had success by street standards as a teenager, and yet that success led inevitably to prison, to watching friends get life sentences, to recognizing that the end game was always death or incarceration. Music gave him an exit. Coach K's persistence gave him an opportunity. His mother's support gave him a foundation. His own work ethic and natural talent made it real. But how many kids in Oakland City right now have that same potential and will never get that chance? How many 10-year-olds are being recruited into the same 3,400 system that Baby entered? How many teenagers are making the same choices Baby made but won't have a Coach K telling them they could be a rapper? That's the bigger picture Baby raps about. That's the systemic change he advocates for. Because he got out, but he knows, intimately, personally, painfully, how many people just like him don't. So let's return to where we started, a 2019 traffic stop in an orange Corvette, an arrest that seemed ironic because Baby had made it but was still dealing with legal troubles. But that irony misses the deeper truth. Making it out of the streets doesn't erase where you came from. Success doesn't delete your past. Money doesn't make you immune to the system that criminalized you in the first place. Lil Baby's journey from $60 to $100 million isn't a rags to riches story in the traditional sense. It's a story about American poverty, about the drug trade as economic opportunity in communities without alternatives, about the criminal justice system's impact on young black men, about the power of second chances, and about what happens when someone with talent and drive gets an opportunity to channel those qualities into something legal. The street economics that Baby mastered, understanding supply and demand, building networks, maintaining reputation, taking calculated risks, those same skills made him a successful artist. The difference is, one path ends in prison or death, and the other ends in platinum plaques and sold-out arenas. Could Baby have made it in music without his street background? Maybe. But the authenticity that makes his music compelling comes directly from those experiences. The work ethic that let him release 7 projects in 2 years comes from hustling in the streets every day as a teenager. The business acumen that's made him one of the smartest artists in hip-hop comes from learning economics by selling crack. That doesn't glorify the streets. If anything, it highlights the tragedy. All that talent, all that potential, all that intelligence being channeled into an industry that destroys communities because it's the only economic opportunity available. Baby made it out. He's rich, famous, successful by every conventional measure. But he did so knowing that most people who start where he started don't make it. They end up with life sentences like his cousins. They end up dead like so many of his friends. They end up trapped in cycles of poverty and incarceration that are designed, intentionally or not, to be inescapable. His success is individual, but the problems that created the circumstances of his childhood are systemic. And that's what the bigger picture is about. That's what Baby's advocacy work is about. That's what his story ultimately is about. From Oakland City to prison to platinum, that's Lil Baby's journey. From $60 to $100 million, that's the economics. From Dominique Jones to one of the biggest rappers in the world, that's the transformation. But the most important part of his story isn't the money or the fame. It's the proof that people can change, that the worst moments of your life don't have to define you forever, that with support, opportunity, and your own commitment to something better, you can write a different ending. Will it work for everyone? No. The systemic problems are too big, the obstacles too numerous, the tragedies too common. But Baby's existence proves it's possible, and possibility in communities where hope is scarce is revolutionary. That's the Lil Baby story. Not a hero's journey, not a cautionary tale, but something more complex and more human. The story of how one man navigated impossible circumstances, made terrible choices and brilliant ones, served time and learned from it, and ultimately found a way out that didn't exist for most people where he came from. The streets taught him how to hustle. Prison taught him he needed a different path. Music gave him that path, and his talent, work ethic, and the people who believed in him made it real. From trap houses to topping charts, that's how Lil Baby made millions in the streets before rap, and how he turned that painful education into a legal empire that's still growing.